philosophers? Why are we reading these things that are hundreds of years old? Does this have any value for our lives? Well, I could stand up here and I could try to provide a defense of philosophy for you. But instead of me trying to provide my own answer to that, I asked you to read an excerpt from a book by a philosopher named Hannah Arendt, one of my favorite thinkers, incredible woman. She was a Jew who fled during the Nazi regime, during the Holocaust. She's someone who is one of the most important social political philosophers of the 20th century. And she spent a lot of time thinking not only about human society and social organization, but also more meta questions like the purpose and value of philosophy. It may have been a good idea to begin the semester by looking at this piece, but I think it's interesting we take a look at it near the end, because I think it's going to provide a frame for us to understand what it is that we've been doing in this class, or at least what it is I've been trying to get y'all to do, and why it matters. And so today we're going to be reading, or I asked you to read, an excerpt of her book from The Life of the Mind, which she wasn't able to finish before she died, in which Arendt is trying to describe and analyze what it is that we're doing when we're thinking. What place does thought have in our lives, and what value does thought have? Today we're going to be investigating an analysis she does of Socrates and Socrates' relationship to thought. Now, a lot of philosophers have written about thinking, about the purpose and value of philosophy. But the interesting thing about trying to provide a philosophy of thought is that if you're a professional philosopher, Arendt thinks you're not going to be able to do that very well. Thought is something interesting and something unique compared to the other activities that we engage in. Whenever we're trying to understand what it is that we're doing when we're thinking, or what kind of value it might hold for us, we have to realize that doing so from kind of a detached, analytical perspective is already starting in the wrong place. And so what Arendt is going to be doing for us today is she's going to be analyzing and describing for us what thought looks like, and she's going to be looking at a figure in the history of philosophy, Socrates, who perhaps has engaged in thinking in the most purest way. I think this is going to be valuable for our class because, well, this class is concerned with thought, but we don't often turn our mind towards what it is that we're supposed to be doing when we're thinking and why it might be useful at all to be thinking in the first place. So Arendt begins this piece by basically explaining what her goal is, which is to provide Socrates' answer to the question, what makes us think, or why do we think? You may not think thought plays a very large role in your life. At least not the kind of thought that philosophers like to talk about, that really critical, deep, conscious kind of thought. But you can't go through your life without thinking in various ways. What seems to be revealed to us when we think about thinking is that there is some need or some drive behind it. There is a reason that we engage in thought. There's a reason why we think throughout our lives, transitioning from, taking in sensory stimuli to reflecting on it, to reflecting on our own lives. There seems to be a reason for this, but it's not immediately apparent what makes us think or why we do it in the first place. But what is common to every philosophical analysis of thinking itself is that it reveals a need behind the process itself. Every answer that has been given by philosophers as to why we think or what makes us think reveals that we do it because we have to in some sense. We need to do it. And you've experienced this yourself. You ruminate. You think about things. You can't get thoughts out of your head sometimes, right? Sometimes your thoughts haunt you. You're driven to think about various things. Maybe it's, fan theories about Gossip Girl. Maybe it's, what is the ideal form of social political organization? Maybe it's, did I do something immoral by not holding the door open for someone, right? We're driven to think about a great many number of things. We're driven to think about how we can transcend our current state. We're driven to think about who we are and what we want. We're driven to think about what meaning there is in life and whether our lives are meaningful, right? There are lots of imperatives, you might say, that drive us to think, or a lot of questions that we have that we want to answer through the thinking process. Thought is just not something that only philosophers or scientists do. Everybody thinks. What we might think about might vary from person to person, but constantly in our lives, we are transitioning from acting in the world and thinking about the world. And this is a cycle that we can't seem to get out of, unless we're asleep or unconscious, right? Arendt comments on this on page 397, right at the beginning of this essay. To the question, what makes us think, I have been giving historically representative answers offered by professional philosophers. These answers are dubious for precisely that reason. The question, when asked by the professional, does not arise out of his own experiences while engaged in thinking. It is asked from the outside, whether that outside is constituted by his professional interests as a thinker or by the common sense in himself that makes him question an activity that is out of order in ordinary living. And the answers we then receive are always too general and vague to have much sense for everyday living, in which thinking, after all, constantly occurs and constantly interrupts the ordinary processes of life, just as ordinary living constantly interrupts thinking. If we strip these answers of their doctrinal content, which of course varies enormously, all we get are confessions of a need. The need to concretize the implications of the Platonic wonder, the need in Kant of the reasoning faculty to transcend the limitations of the knowable, the need to become reconciled with what actually is in the course of the world, appearing in Hegel as the need for philosophy, which can transform occurrences outside yourself into your own thoughts. or the need to search for the meaning of whatever is or occurs, as I have been saying here, no less generally, no less vaguely. And so we seem to be driven to think. This class has been all about thinking. We've been trying to investigate the thoughts of people. And so you might wonder, well, what is all of this for? Why do we do this? Why are we driven to do this? This is precisely the question that we're going to try to answer today. The best place to look for an answer, Arendt thinks, is by examining someone who thinks effortlessly, who can transition from an active mode of life to a contemplative mode of life effortlessly. Someone who doesn't pretend to be a professional, someone who doesn't pretend to know that they have all the answers. And it is for this reason that Arendt thinks that the historical figure of Socrates is a great place to look to try to answer the question, why do we think? And what value does thinking add to our lives? So now let's examine Socrates from Arendt's point of view. Let's look at her analysis of Socrates in this piece. Who was Socrates? What do you know about him? What did he do? What happened to him? Does anybody know?
He's like one of the main guys.
He's one of the main guys, right? He's like the philosopher that everybody's heard of, right?
Oh.
Perhaps the first philosopher, perhaps the greatest philosopher.
The Socratic method comes from Socrates.
What is that?
The Socratic method of like you're having a discussion and it's question and answer based, basically.
Right. It takes place in the form of a dialogue.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just somebody lecturing at you, which is what I tend to fall into, but it's a dialogue, right? One of the first things that Arendt notes about Socrates is that in all of the descriptions that we have of him, which come primarily from Plato, his student, Socrates is often a character in Plato's dialogues. Socrates engages dialogically with people. About many problems and topics, Socrates is always having conversations with people. What's interesting about Socrates is that apparently he never wrote anything down. Socrates never produced any written works of philosophy himself. And therefore, the only things that we really know about Socrates are things that other people have said about him, or characterizations of Socrates in Plato's writings, for example. Socrates was always having conversations with people. And he did this for a number of reasons. It's clear from reading Plato's writings that if they are an accurate representation of him, he enjoyed having conversations with people. But he also thought that these kinds of intense philosophical dialogues could improve humans. Now, what's interesting about all of the Platonic dialogues in which Socrates appears as a character is that the conversations don't really seem to go anywhere. If you ever read them yourself, the conversation normally starts with a question. What is justice? What is love? Various people in the dialogue try to provide answers to these questions, but Socrates finds a way to show them that they're wrong or that they didn't think of something. And on the conversation seems to go, never coming to a final resolution. All of the dialogues in which Socrates seemed to be engaged in are aporetic. This word aporetic or aporia basically means paradoxical. They don't come to a final stopping place where we can say something definitively and truly about something. It's kind of left hanging in the air. Arendt comments on this on page 399. The first thing that strikes us in Plato's Socratic dialogues is that they are all aporetic. The argument either leads nowhere or goes around in circles. In order to know what justice is, you must know what knowledge is. And in order to know that, you must have a previous unexamined notion of knowledge. Here, quote, a man cannot try to discover either what he knows or what he does not know. If he knows, there is no need of inquiry. If he does not know, he does not even know what he's supposed to look for. Or, in the Euthyphro, in order to be pious, you must know what piety is. The things that please the gods are pious, but are they pious because they please the gods, or do they please the gods because they're pious? We don't seem to get a straight answer on this. None of the logii arguments ever stay put. They move around. And because Socrates, asking questions to which he does not know the answers, sets them in motion, once the statements have come full circle, it is usually Socrates who cheerfully proposes to start all over again and inquire what justice or piety or knowledge or happiness are. For the topics of these early dialogues deal with very simple everyday concepts, such as arise whenever people open their mouths and begin to talk. The introduction usually runs as follows. To be sure, there are happy people, just deeds, courageous men, beautiful things to see and admire. Everybody knows about them. The trouble starts with our nouns, it seems, presumably derived from the adjectives we apply to particular cases as they appear to us. We see a happy man, perceive the courageous deed or the just decision. In short, the trouble arrives with such words as happiness, courage, justice, and so on, what we now call concepts, and what Plato somewhat later called ideas perceivable only by the eyes of the mind. These words are part and parcel of our everyday speech, and still we can give no account of them. When we try to define them, they get slippery. When we talk about them and their meaning, nothing stays put anymore. Everything begins to move. So instead of repeating what we learned from Aristotle, that Socrates was the man who discovered the concept, we shall ask what Socrates did when he discovered it. For surely these words were part of the Greek language before he tried to force the Athenians and himself to give an account of what they and he meant, in the firm belief, of course, that no speech could be possible without them. And so it is very curious that when we examine who everybody seems to know, the philosopher everybody has heard of, perhaps the greatest philosopher of all time, people think, that he never actually gives any straightforward answers to the questions that he poses and that others ask him. This is a little weird, right? Why is this guy so important? Why should we care about anything he says if he doesn't actually give us any answers? the concepts that are always brought up in these dialogues, as are brought up in every philosophy class you'll ever take, and this one, are slippery. The concepts move around. We can't seem to get a good handle on any of the answers to the questions that we're trying to answer. Try as we might, whenever we think, it seems like we get further and further from the goal of really trying to understand what it is we're trying to know. I told you at the beginning of this class, if you end up studying philosophy, an interesting thing might happen to you. The more that you'll study philosophy, the less you will know. And I don't think this is a coincidence. And I don't think Arendt thinks it's a coincidence either. What is revealed in the model of Socrates is not that philosophy is useful because it provides answers to the questions that we seek, but its value lies in something else. Socrates was considered to be many things throughout these dialogues. If we look at a few dialogues in particular, he's called a gadfly, a midwife, and an electric ray. Probably wondering, what the heck does that mean? Well, if we examine the critiques leveled against Socrates in some of these dialogues, I think it will become a little bit clearer. Arendt shows us that all of these labels have something to do with the kind of effect that Socrates is having on those whom he converses with and those who he discusses philosophy with. As a gadfly, he stings others and arouses them from their sleep. What do you think is meant by that? If you're talking with someone who is philosophically minded and they're asking you why you believe in what you believe and what you know, what effect might that have on you? Let's imagine you never had a philosophical conversation in your life and all of a sudden you run into a philosophy major at college. Yeah.
Maybe it can cause you to have some kind of like epiphany or like crazy realization about like the meaning of life and your perspective.
Could be. Yeah. As a gadfly, what Socrates does is he awakens people from their non-thinking, non-reflective life. Wakes them up. As soon as someone poses a question to you that you haven't thought of before or that wasn't important to you before, something awakens within you. You're no longer just a passive receptacle of sensations, but something active begins to occur in you. You start actually thinking and reflecting about stuff. This is one of the roles that Socrates played. So much of what he's doing in these dialogues is awakening people from their non-thinking existence. But he didn't just play this role. He was also considered to be a midwife of sorts. What is a midwife?
Someone who like helps someone give birth, correct?
Right. Yeah. Help someone give birth, exactly.
A hypothetical birth, that isn't tangible, but like a birth of thought.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the key jobs of a midwife is not only to aid in labor, but also to figure out, the status of the child. Is the child okay? Is there something wrong with the child before they hand it to the mother, right? Socrates has been labeled as a midwife because he's able to purge others of their opinions, of their unexamined prejudgments about the world, so that they could actually begin thinking. Arendt characterizes this as when he's having conversations with people and they have a thought or they have an opinion about something, he critically examines that opinion to see if there's actually something useful and alive there, if they had actually thought about something before they opened their mouths, or if they just spouted something dead and lifeless and worthless. In this way, we can call Socrates a midwife, because he purges people of their unexamined prejudgments about things. This is what Arendt means by the term opinion. You've heard everybody has an opinion. What Socrates does when he's conversing with people is he shows how a lot of what they believe is stuff that they just haven't thought about. Or what they say, they just haven't thought about. They either got it from somewhere else, they're just parroting what somebody else said, or they're just a mirror for what society or culture is telling them. Instead of actually thinking it through themselves and coming to a judgment based on reasoning, argument. Finally, he's considered to be an electric ray. And this is, I think, the most interesting characterization of Socrates. What do rays do?
They zap you.
They zap you,
Yeah.
right?
With knowledge.
What else might they zap you with? Metaphorically speaking. Not with knowledge. Let's think of something a little bit more apparatic. Let's imagine I'm asking you all these philosophy questions. You think you know what justice is. You think you know what love is. You think you know what truth is and courage. I'm asking you all these questions. You can't answer them at all. How do you feel? What arises within you?
Stupid.
Perhaps you feel stupid. You feel perplexed, right?
Yes.
You're like, oh God, this flurry of questions. I don't know how to deal with this, right?
Confusion ray.
Confusion ray, perhaps.
Just like
As a ray, an electric ray, Socrates perplexes others in the ways that he is perplexed. See, Socrates never claimed to be a philosopher. He never claimed that he knew anything. It was once said that when somebody went to the oracle at Delphi to ask who the wisest man in Greece was, the oracle said it was Socrates. Socrates didn't believe this, so he went around the different city-states and he started asking people, well, do you know something I don't know? What is justice? What is courage? What is all this stuff? The realization that we come to at the end of hearing this story and reading the Platonic dialogues is not that Socrates was the wisest because he knew the most, but because he was willing to admit he didn't know anything.
If that's all it takes, I'm also not.
Maybe it also does take a little bit of knowledge and experience, but what he's doing in these dialogues is he isn't providing answers. He's perplexing people in the ways that he's perplexed. He's like, I thought I know what justice was, But then look at all this stuff over here. I started thinking about this, and I was like, well, that can't be it. This is what happens when you engage philosophically with others in a deep and meaningful way. You start getting perplexed and confused, and you start questioning your beliefs, right? You start questioning what you thought you knew. Your whole world can be turned upside down if you're not careful. And this is what Socrates ended up doing to a lot of people in Athens. So much so that he was charged and ultimately killed for confusing and riling up the youth by perplexing them too much, by destabilizing the beliefs and views that they held so dear previously. Perhaps you've also felt this in this class. You probably come away with thinking, well, I knew less than I did before. Maybe that is just the way of philosophy. I don't know. Arendt basically is arguing here that Socrates was not properly a philosopher or someone who was trying to use rhetoric to achieve political goals or to get money or anything like that. On page 403, she characterizes him thusly. Hence Socrates, as a gadfly, midwife, electric ray, is not a philosopher. He teaches nothing and has nothing to teach. And he is not a sophist, for he does not claim to make men wise. He only points out to them that they are not wise, that nobody is, a pursuit keeping him so busy that he has no time for either public or private affairs. And while he defends himself vigorously against the charge of corrupting the youth, he nowhere pretends that he is improving them. Nevertheless, he claims that the appearance in Athens of thinking and examining represented in himself was the greatest good that ever befell the city. Thus, he was concerned with what thinking is good for, although in this, as in all other respects, he did not give a clear-cut answer. We may be sure that a dialogue dealing with the question, what is thinking good for, would have ended in the same perplexities as all the others. And so, because he did not try to teach other people what was true, and because he was not trying to make men wise, what Arendt thinks he was engaged in was not properly being a teacher or a sophist or being a professional philosopher at all. Yet he still thought, and he still thought that thinking had incredible value. But now you're probably wondering, if thinking doesn't give us the answers that we're looking for, if thinking destabilizes our concepts and our beliefs, what really is it good for at all? Well, an answer will reveal itself if we keep following Arendt's train of thought here. As has been noted, at least implicitly several times in this class, and perhaps you know this too, deep down, thinking is dangerous. What happens if you think too much?
You become smarter.
Do you?
You have a panic attack?
You have a panic? Why would you have a panic attack from thinking too much?
It's a lot of brain power.
Oh, I do not be thinking about good things.
Ah, okay. So you're driven to think, but sometimes you're not driven to think about nice or happy things, right?
I live on Earth, and that's bad.
You live on Earth, and that's bad. Yes,
And
it can be.
And then I be thinking too much. You know?
What does thinking too much do to you? What does it do to how you see the world and how you feel about yourself?
Negative.
Negative. Anybody else?
Thumbs down.
It kind of like, I mean, the same can be said for like media, you know, like media in quotation marks, but like it just kind of desensitizes everything. You know, the good things and the bad things, they all either seem like so, you know, so meaningless or so, you know, intricate and, you know, crazy that it's like too much and it's like an overload, you know? Like, there's no happy sort of medium with that.
Right, you can drive yourself into pits of despair by thinking too much, right? You can begin to question your own values, your own beliefs, whether or not anybody ever told you was true, if you keep going down that rabbit hole, right? Like Descartes did. Arendt notes here that thinking has the capacity to undo or unfreeze what language has frozen into thought. And this is exactly the kind of effect that Socrates has on the people that he speaks to, right? He perplexes them with his speech. He upsets their previously held opinions and beliefs about things. He gets them to question their beliefs. He purges them of their unexamined opinions. Thinking, Arendt says, inevitably has a destructive aspect to it. Thinking inevitably has a destructive, undermining effect on all established criteria, values, measurements of good and evil, morals, and ethics. If we think too much, right? And you know this based on your own life experience. You all have a friend, or perhaps you're that friend, who thinks too much, who goes down all these rabbit holes, who drives themselves crazy, perhaps who has panic attacks because they think too much, really wonders if all this is worth it, if there's any meaning in life, if anything matters, if anything is true. We can all become swept up in this active, windy process of thought. It carries us to and fro from one thought to another, from one idea, from one belief to another, and it has a way of shaking us up if we're not careful about it. Thus, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to engage in thought. You never know where thinking is going to take you. This is what Arendt says about it. The bottom of page 404. This leads to the last and perhaps even greatest danger of this dangerous and profitless enterprise, thinking. In the circle around Socrates, there were men like Alcibiades and Critias, God knows by no means the worst among his so-called pupils, who had turned out to be a real threat to the polis. And this not because they had been paralyzed by the electric ray, but on the contrary, because they had been aroused by the gadfly. What they had been aroused to was license and cynicism. Not content with being taught how to think without being taught a doctrine. Socrates didn't hand out doctrines to people. He didn't tell them what to think. They changed the non-results of the Socratic thinking examination into negative results. If we cannot define what piety is, let us be impious. Which is pretty much the opposite of what Socrates had hoped to achieve by talking about piety in the first place. The quest for meaning, which relentlessly dissolves and examines anew all accepted doctrines and rules, can at any moment turn against itself, produce a reversal of the old values, and declare these contraries to be new values. To a certain extent, this is what Nietzsche did when he reversed Platonism, forgetting that a reversed Plato is still Plato, or what Marx did when he turned Hegel upside down, producing a strictly Hegelian system of history in the process. Such negative, cynical results of thinking will then be used within the same unthinking routine as before. The moment they are applied to the realm of human affairs, it is as though they had never gone through the thinking process. What we commonly call nihilism, and are tempted to date historically, decry politically, and ascribe to thinkers who allegedly dared to think dangerous thoughts, is actually a danger inherent in the thinking activity itself. There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. But nihilism is not its product. Nihilism is but the other side of conventionalism. Its creed consists of negations of the current so-called positive values, to which it remains bound. All critical examinations must go through a stage of at least hypothetically negating accepted opinions and values by searching out their implications and tacit assumptions. And in this sense, nihilism may be seen as an ever-present danger of thinking. But that danger does not arise out of the Socratic conviction that an unexamined life is not worth living, but on the contrary, out of the desire to find results that would make further thinking unnecessary. Thinking is equally dangerous to all creeds, and by itself does not bring forth any new creed. Its most dangerous aspect from the viewpoint of common sense is that what was meaningful while you were thinking dissolves the moment you want to apply it to everyday living. When common opinion gets hold of the concepts, that is, the manifestations of thinking in everyday speech, and begins to handle them as though they were the results of cognition, the end can only be a clear demonstration that no man is wise. Practically, thinking means that each time you are confronted with some difficulty in life, you have to make up your mind anew. And so, thinking is dangerous. Inherently contained within the activity of thinking is the danger that you're going to come to reject everything that you previously held dear. And then you're going to impose your new beliefs on the world, right? Which can have disastrous effects on others and on yourself. What is perhaps even more dangerous than thinking, though, is not thinking. Why do you think that might be the case? Why might not thinking be even more dangerous than thinking? Thinking is inherently dangerous. It can turn your whole world upside down. Why would not thinking be worse?
Well, just because thinking's dangerous doesn't mean all the outcomes are bad, right? Like, you can, like, skydiving is dangerous, but you can have a lot of fun, right?
True.
Like, danger isn't necessarily, like, just because something is dangerous does not mean that you get, like, there isn't a good thing that can come from it.
Yeah,
But
plus,
not thinking
It could be equally as dangerous or more dangerous.
Not thinking, but like what good can come from not thinking?
I feel like not thinking is just like a perpetual unawareness of everything going on around you.
But why would that be bad?
Ignorance is bliss, right? Isn't that term?
There-
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Comes back to you.
Yeah, maybe we don't want to bother with thinking at all. If thinking just drives us into panic mode, if it just confuses us, maybe we should just spend our entire lives not thinking about anything. Wouldn't that be a preferable way to live?
I mean, like, yes, but also no.
Why do you say no?
Oh my god. To just be unaware of every single thing that's happening, that sounds wonderful, but also I would never want that, and I'd go crazy. I go crazy knowing that I don't know everything right now. So, like,
And you never will.
I will. Well, anyways, no, I just feel like a lack of awareness about things is significantly more dangerous because then you're ignoring them and then they can get worse.
Like what?
But then if you're thinking about it, then you're thinking it might be worse. I don't know.
You might make it worse in your mind by thinking about it
Yeah.
too much. That's true.
What did you ask me? Like what?
Why would not thinking be more dangerous than thinking? Can you think of any examples in history where not thinking produced some really bad results?
Yes.
I know my mind always
Do
goes
you
to that
remember the
example.
2016 election?
Trojan horse.
No.
Trojan horse, perhaps?
Well, I mean, listen.
Say
I know
it.
I always go to this example, but like the just following orders, the
Just following orders, right.
great atrocities are committed by mindless individuals.
If you are not thinking, you are a puppet. If you don't actually think about what people are saying to you, what people are claiming, if you're not questioning reality, ultimately what is going to happen to you is you're going to be a puppet in somebody else's projects.
Being complacent is worse.
Right? Right. Complacency and non-thinking go together. Right? You could spend your whole life not thinking. What happens? Well, if you spend your whole life non-thinking, you would first become just a mini version of your parents, probably. Right? Because they instill certain values and lessons in you, and you never question them. You would become a mini version of the society in which you live, a conformist, an automaton, perhaps, like Fromm was arguing. You would become a person who just mindlessly follows orders. And we know what happens when people mindlessly follow orders from history. Not thinking is more dangerous, I would argue, than thinking, because it has more than just personal effects. It has social effects, right? It can impact other people, not thinking. Whereas thinking too much probably is only going to hurt you. Indirectly, it might hurt others, but... So thinking is dangerous. Not thinking is dangerous. What are we going to do?
A healthy balance.
What makes us think, and why is thinking valuable at all? This is the question we've been trying to answer, right? Socrates does not provide us with a clear-cut answer as to why he thinks and why it is valuable. But we can look at how he lived and the things that he said and the activities that he engaged in to tease out an answer here. The lesson we get from looking at the Platonic dialogues, from looking at Socrates' life, is that the answer he proposes is that thinking is truly living. That's what it means to live. If you're not thinking, you're just reacting to what's happening to you in your environment, right? Even the smallest, 1-2-celled organisms can react. Does that mean that they're really living? No. Thinking is somehow implicitly tied to what it means to live a full and meaningful life. Thinking allows one both to truly live and to live a better life. Dangerous though it might be. At the very end of this piece, Arendt discusses this. To come back to Socrates, the Athenians told him that thinking was subversive, that the wind of thought was a hurricane sweeping away all the established signs by which men orient themselves, bringing disorder into the cities and confusing the citizens. And though Socrates denies that thinking corrupts, he does not pretend that it improves anybody either. It rouses you from sleep, thinking, and this seems to be a great good for the city. Yet he does not say that he began his examining in order to become such a great benefactor. As far as he himself is concerned, there is nothing more to be said than that life deprived of thought would be meaningless, even though thought will never make men wise or give them the answers to thought's own question. The meaning of what Socrates was doing lay in the activity itself. Or to put it differently, to think and to be fully alive are the same. And this implies that thinking must always begin afresh. It is an activity that accompanies living and is concerned with such concepts as justice, happiness, virtue, offered us by language itself as expressing the meaning of whatever happens in life and occurs to us while we are alive. What I call the quest for meaning appears in Socrates' language as love. That is, love in its Greek significance of eros, not in the Christian agape. Love as eros is primarily a need. It desires what it has not. Men love wisdom and therefore begin to philosophize because they are not wise. And they love beauty and do beauty because they are not beautiful. Love is the only matter in which Socrates pretends to be an expert. And this skill guides him too in choosing his companions and friends. Quote, "While I may be worthless in all other matters," Socrates says, "this talent I have been given. I can easily recognize a lover and a beloved. By desiring what it has not, love establishes a relationship with what is not present. In order to bring this relationship into the open, make it appear, men want to speak about it, just as the lover wants to speak about the beloved, whether that's NASCAR, whether that's your boyfriend or girlfriend, whether that is the hit TV wilderness series Alone. Because thought's quest is a kind of desirous love, only the objects of love are lovable things. Beauty, wisdom, justice, and so on. Ugliness and evil are almost by definition excluded from the thinking concern. They may turn up as deficiencies, ugliness consisting in lack of beauty, evil in the lack of good, but as such they have no roots of their own, no essence that thought could get a hold of. If thinking dissolves positive concepts into their original meaning, then the same process must dissolve these negative concepts into their original meaninglessness. that is, into nothing for the thinking ego. That is why Socrates believed no one could do evil voluntarily, because of, as we would say, its ontological status. It consists in an absence, in something that is not. And that is why Democritus, who thought of logos, speech, as following action in the same way that the shadow accompanies all real things, thus distinguishing them from mere semblances, counseled against speaking of evil deeds, ignoring evil, depriving it of any manifestation in speech, will turn it into a mere semblance, something that has no shadow. We found the same exclusion of evil when we were following Plato's admiring, affirming wonder as it unfolds into thinking. It is found in almost all Occidental philosophers as well. And thus, it looks as though Socrates had nothing more to say about the connection between evil and lack of thought than that people who are not in love with beauty, justice, and wisdom are incapable of thought. Just as conversely, those who are in love with examining and thus do philosophy would be incapable of doing evil. As long as one thinks, they employ whatever is alive and active in them. It takes no energy, it takes no life to be a consumer, to just take in sensations, food, drink, to be passive in this life. What thinking is active. You're participating in life. You're moving with the spirit that energizes everything. Because you yourself are that in some way. And as long as one thinks, one cannot do evil. As long as you're thinking, you can't do anything else. It's only when you stop thinking that you begin to act. Right? And so when you think, when anybody thinks, you are employing what is alive in you. You are employing something that makes you uniquely human. And you are engaged in something that not only that we seem to have a need for, but something that we can't get away from. Right? You are not going to be able to go the rest of your life without thinking. You might want to, because sometimes thinking can hurt, but you're going to be driven to thought. And so for Socrates, at least according to Arendt's analysis, we think because we live, and in some sense, we live because we think. These two are inextricably linked. Though thinking is dangerous, it also has a lot of great consequences as well when employed properly, right? And as long as we are engaged in actually reflecting on what people tell us, reflecting on the nature of the world, reflecting on our goals and our wishes and our dreams, we are incapable of going out there and making the world worse. As long as we're thinking. Now, if you spend all your time thinking, you're never going to do anything. But the thinking person cannot do evil. Because to act means to not think. In my estimation, this is what it means to do philosophy. This is why I do what I do. Philosophy is all about thinking. A lot of thinking happens in conversation, right? Perhaps some of the best memories you've ever had are with really stimulating conversations you've had with others. There are some who think philosophy is just shuffling words around, or it's just, reading what old dead white men have written hundreds of years ago. But philosophy can't be done without thought. That is what it means to be a philosopher. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom. A philosopher is just someone who thinks, someone who's actually reflecting on stuff. Philosophy, as the art of thought, does awaken us, it does perplex us, it does purge us of those opinions that we haven't really thought about or really examined. But insofar as philosophy is thinking, it constitutes the very spirit of what it means to live, truly live as a human. That's the answer that we receive from this text, I believe. Whenever we think, we are beginning anew. And there is something involved in that initiatory process that reminds us of the way life works, the meaning of life, how life operates. Thinking can wrestle us out of the apathetic complacency that we find ourselves falling into as we live into our lives. It can open us up to new ways of understanding the world. It can be enjoyable in and of itself, provided you don't do it too much, perhaps. There's real value in thinking. And so let me just reiterate to you one more thing that I said at the start of the class so that you come away with a better understanding of what I've been trying to do this entire semester and why this all matters. I don't want you to take anything that I've been telling you at face value. All right, I am your professor. I do have some sort of knowledge of these texts, and I think some semblance of the way the world works, a little bit. But I really want you to think about this stuff. Don't just accept what you hear on TV. Don't just accept what people on Facebook are posting, or even what I'm saying. If you really want to embody the spirit of this class, the spirit of philosophy, you think about this stuff. You talk about it with your friends. You question each other. You remain skeptical of what you've been told. Skeptical, but also open-minded. I know y'all probably don't see a lot of value in this class for your everyday life, but if it can get you to just think a little bit more about what you're being told and what you're doing, I will have considered this class a success for you. The grade doesn't matter. Coming to every class doesn't matter. It's the thinking that matters. Okay. So what do you think of what Arendt is saying here?
Hard.
Hard?
Like hard,
Like it goes hard?
Yeah, hard. Yeah,
Yeah,
not
like slip.
Say that, what?
Slay.
Slay. I thought you said slip, and I was like, I've never heard that one. All right, I've heard slay.
Heat.
Heat.
Straight heat, yeah.
Straight
Right.
heat. Straight fire, right?
On God, yeah.
Do you think she's wrong in any of what she says?
No.
She probably goes wrong somewhere, right? Everybody goes wrong now and then. But
I mean, I was looking.
I feel like the only thing I would want to argue with is saying that Socrates is the all-knowing, but I don't think that she's really saying that either. I think that she's just this is a very big thinker in history, and this was his outlook on this.
right.
So I don't
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot to critique, really.
Yeah,
I'm
she
sure if I dug hard enough, I could find something. But
Yeah, she does not want to convince us that Socrates has all the answers. In fact, Socrates explicitly tells pretty much everybody he talks to, I don't know the answers. That's why I'm talking to you.
right. I feel
I'm trying to figure this out here, and you're just offering me, dead, lifeless concepts.
I think it's too open of a thought. It has a philosophy to be right or wrong.
Well, that's another perplexing thing about this whole lecture and what she's saying. One of the things that she's revealing to us by examining Socrates is that thinking and the products of thinking are not that applicable to everyday life. Because whenever you think and you come up with a concept or an idea and you try to apply it, it's never general enough to be efficient and working and operating in all circumstances. Right? You come up with a rule or you come up with a plan, it's not going to be totally successful. It's never going to be totally right. And so thinking has an interesting way of leading us into a false sense of security. But at the same time, we have to do it. We can't not do it. We're stuck with this thing. And I think the takeaway is that the value of philosophy, the value of thinking, doesn't come from what it produces, but from doing the activity itself. Like painting. Or like making a piece of music that you're really passionate about. The value doesn't come from a painting in, your ability to sell it to someone. If you're passionate about painting, it comes from actually doing the activity, right? If you love chess, the value doesn't come from how much money you can make by beating all the chess hustlers in your neighborhood. It comes from playing chess. The same thing is true of philosophy, paradoxically. Because while I'd like to sit up here and tell you philosophy is useful for this and this and this and this, it can help you see the world better, it can help you think more critically, it can help you do all these things, ultimately the reason why I do it is not because it can do any of that for me. It's because I love it. Isn't that the reason why we do what we do in life? So it's a weird paradoxical conclusion to come to. But maybe even thinking that it's a conclusion is missing the point too. We have to keep thinking about it, right? Whoa. The thinking never stops until you die. And maybe it goes on after that, if we don't actually die. I don't know.
I hope not.
Maybe it depends what you're thinking about, or who you're talking to.
I'm gonna be using that 7 minutes of brain power you have left over, and I'm just gonna be like, I need a rest. I can't wait for this to be done.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions about what she's? I mean, this is a very meta lecture,
Yeah.
so it's kind of confusing. And I don't claim to understand it all either.
I'm not confused or anything. I'm just kind of like, yeah, word. Like, I agree.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments on thinking, the value of thinking? You all know people in your life who don't think.
Sure do.
Is it fun to be around those people?
Oh my God. You know what? I think about my actions before I do them, and then it stops me from popping them because of how stupid they are.
Imagine that, thinking before you act. What a good idea, huh? Is there any way that any of what we've talked about today, you're going to slot it into how you see or how you act? If so, how is it going to inform you moving forward? Yeah.
It's just gonna make me annoy my friends more with this stuff. Because like over the break,
Maybe you're an electric array, you know?
I went home and they like got mad at me for bringing up stuff like this. Like I'm like, we're sitting there, we're playing little Smash Brothers. I don't know, we're doing something, hanging out, drinking. I don't know. We're like, and I'm like, and I get all philosophical when I'm drunk, and I'm like, you know, I'm bringing up all these questions, and I brought up the pedophilia one just because it's fun, and I know it makes people like really angry.
Provocative, yeah.
Provocative, and they were like, "What? We're playing Smash. Why are you talking about this?" And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know. It's fun to talk about.
Yeah.
And then they started talking about it once
People
I did
get
it.
so
They got mad. And I was like,
I'll
okay,
get so
see?
high, and I'll just start talking about shit like this all the time. They'll be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, dude, I'm having a good time. I need to tell you.
Now you know how Socrates feels, right? People are getting mad at him because, you know, he's upsetting their beliefs.
Or ruining their
And then they killed him.
Yeah,
They killed him
did
for.
do that.
I don't think they're going to kill him.
There's this show on Netflix. It's a newer show. It's called Inside Man. It has like Stanley Tucci and David Tennant in it. It's pretty good. But in a part of the show, there's a guy who is a pedophile, and he ends up killing himself. And we were watching it, me and my roommate, my boyfriend, and my roommate's boyfriend, who's also my boyfriend's roommate, which is kind of interesting. But we were all watching it, and my boyfriend's roommate like brought up how he like kind of felt bad because like he like I don't know whatever in the show, and fucking I was like, actually, you know, we could have a long talk about this, and I was like blah 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 blah, and we like talked about it for like an hour and a half.
Was
And
it
I
enjoyable?
Like, I know a lot about pedophiles, I guess. As enjoyable as that conversation could be, yeah, it was a good sort of like, you know, back and forth that we had.
Does anybody think thinking is overrated?
Yeah.
Say why.
And no.
Yeah and no?
Yeah. I don't know.
That's an abhorrent
I think,
answer there.
I think some people think that them thinking makes them better than everybody around them. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that thinking makes you a better person. I don't think that like your ability to think means that you're more valuable than somebody that doesn't think as much as you do.
Sure.
And I feel like, I don't know. I also, listen, this is separate, but I think I came up with a critique for this. And I know it's like not really, I guess it's not as like part of this as it would be. I think that like if I were to do something like this, I think I'd put in that I think there needs to be a healthy balance between these like things. But like I obviously know that like that's not what she was going for necessarily, but I think that like concluding it with being like we need to find a way to think about all of like everything without torturing ourselves and also not being ignorant and stupid.
Right.
I don't know how possible that is, but I feel like that's the only thing about this that I could be like, maybe you should put that in there.
Right.
Just because I feel like people will torture themselves with their thoughts if you don't.
We
if
all
you
do
don't
that
say
already, don't we?
Yeah, but I feel like if you say something like that, maybe it's less like, it feels less catastrophic when you read this and you're like, if I think and I read and I think I'm gonna die.
Right. Yeah, there's value in life to be found not only in thinking, but also in action and in experience. Right? If you're doing a complex math problem in your head, you know, while you're at the Iron Maiden show, what value are you getting from that experience, right? Whatever it is,
Yeah,
I don't know. What
yeah,
do
they're
the
all-
kids listen to? Not Iron Maiden, but Juice WRLD. I don't know.
My two favorite artists.
Yes, Iron Maiden.
Someone out there has that opinion. There's a person that exists that loves Iron Maiden and Juice WRLD.
I'm not anti either.
No, yeah, I'm just saying, but like that's a weird combo. Could you imagine like someone being like, yeah, those are my two favorite artists?
Yeah. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You don't want to be swept away by a hurricane of thought that leaves you completely untethered from reality, that drives you into a panic, that drives you into a nihilistic despair. That's not good for yourself. That's not good for others, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be someone who doesn't think at all. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're just reacting to what the world is throwing at you, and you're not, I would argue, you're not truly living if you're just reacting.
Consuming.
Consuming.
Also a good one.
Oh yeah, could bring Fromm back into it. And so I don't know if I've convinced you that there's value to thinking, but
I think there's value to not just being reactive.
I would also agree. If I haven't convinced you anything, which isn't my ultimate goal anyway, I hope that you at least found some value in going through this today. I think it's interesting. That's why I chose it. That's why I designed the syllabus this way. Does anybody have any final questions or thoughts, though? Otherwise, I'll let you all go a few minutes early here. Yeah.
I don't know, like the thought of like, this is vague, but like when it was like in reference to Socrates talking about like justice, we're talking about like ideas and concepts, like almost the vagueness of those concepts when you really get down to it is kind of like a weird thing.
Yeah.
Me. Like how justice isn't real in any sense outside of like our colloquial.
It's like a concept that we made
What
up.
movie was it? It's like a movie about aliens, and like they come and their language is indecipherable, and like but once this lady deciphers their language, she's able to like see.
Arrival?
Yeah. And it was like how different languages have different words for things that allow them to see things differently, and how like maybe we didn't maybe like language. Maybe using language is like impossible to convey love, because like the feeling of love, you can just say, oh, love, but like that doesn't convey what it is. It's
right.
Like, because you can't really necessarily understand it without like literally like being hooked up to that person's brain and like sending brainwaves to each other. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a little crazy.
Well, one of the things that one of the interesting things about language is that languages are a lens with which to view the world. They're not just a mode of communication. They're not just a mode of information exchange, but they offer you a different perspective on the world.
Like different words for different, like the same thing can have different connotations.
Well, and there are words in other languages that describe a particular experience that we don't have.
Annoying.
Right? The interesting thing about the concepts that you brought up is exactly what Socrates is cluing us into in the dialogues, which is we throw around these words: home, justice, courage, love, but we don't really know what they are, and we can't really defend why it is that we believe that thing is what it is. We can always keep questioning, which could lead you into nihilism. So be careful, but I think it is an important activity nonetheless.
What do you think?
I think, that's right.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody have anything else to say?
Oh,
Okay, I'll let you go then. Thank you for coming. I hope to see you on Wednesday. We're going over a very interesting philosophy on Wednesday.